What if I told you that one of the most common evening habits could be silently keeping your body locked in a fat storage mode all night long while also draining your energy the next day? This is not about eating too much in general. This is about timing, hormones, and how your body behaves differently at night compared to daytime. One of the most overlooked metabolic disruptors is late evening eating, especially when it keeps insulin levels elevated during the hours your body is supposed to be repairing, resetting, and burning fat. To understand this, you need to first understand insulin as more than just a blood sugar hormone. Insulin is fundamentally a storage hormone. Its primary role is to move glucose out of the bloodstream and store it in cells. But when insulin is elevated consistently, especially at night, it shifts the body away from fat burning and into fat storage mode. Normally, as the evening progresses, your insulin levels should naturally decline. This allows another metabolic process to take over, lipolysis, which is the breakdown of stored fat for energy. During sleep, your body is designed to be in a mild fat-burning state, using stored fuel while growth hormone and repair processes are active. However, when you eat late at night, especially meals high in carbohydrates or refined sugars, you override this natural hormonal rhythm. Your pancreas releases insulin in response to glucose, and instead of declining, insulin remains elevated for several hours into the night. This creates a metabolic environment where fat burning is essentially switched off. At the same time, elevated insulin directly inhibits hormone-sensitive lipase, which is the key enzyme responsible for breaking down stored body fat. In simple terms, when insulin is high, your body is chemically blocked from accessing fat stores for energy. Instead, it continues to store incoming calories even while you are sleeping. This becomes even more problematic when late-night eating is habitual. Over time, repeated insulin spikes in the evening contribute to insulin resistance. This means your cells become less responsive to insulin, forcing your body to produce even more of it to achieve the same effect. Higher insulin levels then create a vicious cycle of increased fat storage, particularly in the abdominal region. Another critical aspect is the impact on your liver. At night, your liver plays a central role in regulating glucose and lipid metabolism. But when insulin remains elevated due to late eating, the liver prioritizes glucose storage over fat oxidation. This interferes with normal overnight detoxification and metabolic reset processes. Instead of clearing and balancing metabolic waste, your liver remains in a processing and storage state. There is also a strong connection between late insulin elevation and disrupted growth hormone secretion. Growth hormone is typically released during deep sleep and plays a major role in tissue repair, muscle maintenance, and fat metabolism. However, high insulin levels suppress growth hormone release. This means your body loses one of its most powerful fat-burning and recovery hormones during sleep. Clinically, this combination leads to a very predictable outcome: waking up feeling tired, sluggish, and often hungrier than expected. That morning fatigue is not just poor sleep quality, it is a direct reflection of disrupted overnight metabolic function. Additionally, when insulin remains elevated at night, it alters cortisol rhythm the following morning. Cortisol, your natural wake-up hormone, becomes dysregulated, which can further contribute to low energy, brain fog, and increased cravings for quick energy foods like sugar and refined carbohydrates. From a metabolic standpoint, the solution is not extreme dieting, it is restoring timing. Allowing a sufficient fasting window between your last meal and sleep gives insulin time to fall, allowing the body to shift into fat-burning mode. This also supports better sleep quality, improved growth hormone release, and more efficient overnight recovery. In summary, late evening eating is not just a habit, it is a hormonal signal that tells your body to store fat instead of burning it. When insulin stays elevated overnight, your metabolism is essentially paused in a storage state, preventing the natural fat-burning processes that should occur while you sleep. What if the reason you wake up exhausted, foggy, and metabolically slower has less to do with sleep duration and more to do with a silent internal rhythm that's been disrupted for hours before you even go to bed? Most people think fatigue is simply a sleep issue. But in clinical physiology, fatigue is often a hormonal and circadian signaling issue. Your body runs on a tightly controlled 24-hour internal clock known as the circadian rhythm, governed by the hypothalamus in the brain. This system synchronizes hormone release, body temperature, glucose metabolism, and cellular repair. When this rhythm is disrupted in the evening, it doesn't just affect sleep, it alters your entire metabolic state. One of the most important hormonal players here is cortisol. Cortisol is not just a stress hormone, it is a metabolic regulator that follows a predictable daily pattern. It should naturally decline in the evening to allow melatonin to rise. Melatonin is the hormone responsible for sleep initiation, cellular repair, and mitochondrial recovery. When this balance is intact, your body transitions smoothly into a restorative, fat-burning recovery state during sleep. However, poor evening habits, such as irregular meal timing, late light exposure, screen use, and inconsistent sleep schedules, can significantly disrupt this hormonal transition. When cortisol remains elevated into the night, it signals the body that it is still in a daytime stress mode. This prevents full activation of melatonin, which directly interferes with sleep depth and quality. At the same time, elevated cortisol has a direct metabolic effect. It increases blood glucose availability by stimulating gluconeogenesis in the liver. This means your body continues producing glucose even when it is not needed. The result is a state of mild metabolic confusion, where your system is neither fully in rest mode nor in efficient energy utilization mode. This disruption has a downstream effect on insulin sensitivity. When circadian rhythm is disturbed, insulin receptors become less responsive. Even normal food intake in the evening can trigger a stronger insulin response than usual. This promotes fat storage and reduces overnight lipid oxidation, which is the process where your body burns stored fat for energy during sleep. Another critical component is melatonin suppression. Melatonin is highly sensitive to light exposure, particularly blue light emitted from screens such as phones, televisions, and computers. When melatonin secretion is suppressed in the evening, your body's ability to transition into deep sleep stages is reduced. This directly affects growth hormone release, which normally peaks during deep sleep and plays a major role in tissue repair, fat metabolism, and immune regulation. Without sufficient growth hormone activity, the body's ability to repair muscle tissue, regulate fat distribution, and maintain metabolic efficiency becomes impaired. Over time, this contributes to increased fatigue, slower recovery, and a gradual reduction in metabolic rate. The circadian rhythm also regulates mitochondrial function. Mitochondria are the energy-producing structures inside your cells. When circadian signals are misaligned, mitochondrial efficiency declines. This means your cells produce less ATP, the primary energy currency of the body. Clinically, this is experienced as persistent tiredness, reduced physical endurance, and mental fatigue. Additionally, disrupted circadian rhythm impacts thyroid hormone conversion. The liver converts inactive thyroid hormone, T4, into its active form, T3. This process is highly dependent on proper circadian signaling and metabolic stability. When this system is disturbed, T3 production can decline, leading to slower metabolism, weight gain tendencies, and increased fatigue. Another overlooked consequence is autonomic nervous system imbalance. A healthy circadian rhythm supports a shift from sympathetic dominance, fight or flight during the day, to parasympathetic dominance, rest and digest, at night. When this transition fails, the body remains in a semi-stressed state overnight, preventing full recovery and contributing to poor sleep quality. In practical terms, this means that even if you are physically asleep, your body may not be fully in a restorative state. Heart rate variability may remain elevated, digestion may be slowed or irregular, and inflammatory markers may remain higher than normal. Over time, this chronic circadian disruption creates a pattern of metabolic inefficiency, reduced insulin sensitivity, impaired fat oxidation, lower growth hormone output, and diminished mitochondrial energy production. These changes collectively explain why people often feel tired, sluggish, and metabolically stuck, even without obvious disease. In summary, poor evening routines do more than disturb sleep. They fundamentally disrupt the hormonal and metabolic timing systems that regulate energy, recovery, and fat metabolism. When your circadian rhythm is misaligned, your body loses its ability to properly switch into repair mode, leaving you in a state of low energy and metabolic dysfunction. What if a simple nighttime habit, something many people don't even consider harmful, was quietly pushing your body toward insulin resistance, stubborn belly fat, and long-term metabolic slowdown? One of the most significant yet underestimated drivers of metabolic dysfunction is high carbohydrate or sugary intake in the late evening. From a physiological standpoint, your body does not process glucose the same way at night as it does during the day. This is not just about calories. It is about hormonal timing, insulin sensitivity, and how your cells respond to glucose based on circadian biology. When you consume refined carbohydrates or sugar in the evening, your digestive system rapidly breaks them down into glucose. This causes a sudden rise in blood sugar levels. In response, your pancreas releases insulin, a key anabolic hormone responsible for moving glucose from the bloodstream into cells. Under normal daytime conditions, this process is efficient and tightly regulated. However, in the evening and nighttime hours, insulin sensitivity naturally declines. This means your muscle and liver cells are less responsive to insulin's signal. As a result, the pancreas must produce a larger amount of insulin to achieve the same glucose clearance. This exaggerated insulin response is the first step toward metabolic imbalance. Repeated exposure to this pattern, especially if it becomes a daily habit, leads to progressive insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is a state in which cells no longer respond properly to insulin, forcing the body to maintain chronically elevated insulin levels. Clinically, this is one of the earliest and most important stages in the development of metabolic syndrome. Now, here is where fat storage becomes particularly problematic. Insulin is not only a glucose-regulating hormone, it is also a potent fat storage hormone. When insulin levels remain elevated, it inhibits lipolysis, the process by which stored fat is broken down for energy. At the same time, it promotes lipogenesis, which is the conversion of excess glucose into fat. The abdominal region is especially sensitive to this process due to higher concentrations of insulin receptors and increased visceral fat activity. Over time, repeated nighttime insulin spikes contribute to the accumulation of visceral fat, which is metabolically active and strongly associated with inflammation, fatty liver development, and cardiovascular risk. Another critical mechanism involves the liver. At night, the liver is expected to shift into a maintenance and metabolic regulation mode. It normally supports glucose stabilization, glycogen balance, and detoxification processes. However, when a large glucose load is introduced in the evening, the liver prioritizes glycogen storage and fat conversion instead of its restorative functions. This overload can lead to increased hepatic fat accumulation, also known as fatty liver progression. Even in individuals who are not overweight, this process can silently develop due to repeated insulin-driven fat deposition in hepatic tissue. Additionally, elevated nighttime insulin interferes with growth hormone secretion. Growth hormone is typically released in pulses during deep sleep and plays a crucial role in fat metabolism, muscle repair, and cellular regeneration. High insulin levels directly suppress growth hormone release, reducing overnight recovery and further impairing fat-burning efficiency. There is also a significant impact on sleep architecture. High blood glucose levels in the evening can lead to unstable blood sugar regulation overnight. This may cause microarousals during sleep, reducing time spent in deep restorative stages such as slow-wave sleep. Poor sleep quality then feeds back into worsening insulin sensitivity the following day, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. From a hormonal perspective, cortisol regulation is also affected. When blood sugar fluctuates excessively during the night, the body may release cortisol to stabilize glucose levels. This is not ideal, as cortisol should be at its lowest during sleep. Elevated nighttime cortisol contributes to stress signaling, increased fat storage, and morning fatigue. On a cellular level, chronic exposure to high insulin disrupts mitochondrial efficiency. Mitochondria are responsible for energy production, and insulin resistance reduces their ability to efficiently utilize glucose and fatty acids. This leads to lower energy output, increased fatigue, and reduced metabolic flexibility, the body's ability to switch between burning carbohydrates and fats. In summary, high carbohydrate or sugary intake in the evening is not just a dietary choice. It is a hormonal signal that directly alters insulin dynamics, fat storage pathways, liver metabolism, and sleep quality. Over time, this pattern contributes to insulin resistance, abdominal fat accumulation, and systemic metabolic decline. What if one of the most common nighttime habits, something almost everyone does without thinking, is quietly suppressing your body's most powerful fat-burning and recovery hormones? One of the most underestimated metabolic disruptors in modern health science is excessive blue light exposure in the evening. This includes light emitted from smartphones, televisions, computers, and LED lighting. While it may seem harmless, at a biological level, light exposure at night directly interferes with hormonal regulation, particularly melatonin production, which is essential for sleep, metabolism, and cellular repair. To understand the impact, you first need to understand melatonin's role beyond sleep. Melatonin is produced by the pineal gland in response to darkness. Its primary function is to regulate the sleep-wake cycle, but it also plays a critical role in antioxidant defense, mitochondrial protection, immune regulation, and metabolic repair. In simple terms, melatonin signals the body that it is time to shift into recovery mode. When blue light enters the eyes in the evening, it suppresses melatonin secretion by signaling to the brain that it is still daytime. This is mediated through specialized retinal cells that communicate directly with the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus, which is the central circadian clock. Even short exposure to screens at night can significantly delay melatonin release. When melatonin is suppressed, the entire hormonal cascade of nighttime recovery becomes disrupted. One of the most important downstream effects is impaired growth hormone secretion. Growth hormone is normally released in pulses during deep sleep, particularly during slow-wave sleep stages. It is responsible for muscle repair, fat metabolism, and tissue regeneration. Without adequate melatonin signaling, deep sleep quality declines, and growth hormone output is significantly reduced. This creates a direct metabolic consequence: reduced fat-burning efficiency overnight. Growth hormone plays a key role in promoting lipolysis, the breakdown of stored fat for energy. When its secretion is blunted, the body shifts away from using fat as a fuel source during sleep, leading to a slower metabolic recovery state. Another important impact is on cortisol regulation. Under normal conditions, cortisol levels should be low at night and gradually rise in the early morning to support wakefulness. However, blue light exposure and melatonin suppression can disrupt this rhythm. When melatonin is low, cortisol regulation becomes unstable, and some individuals experience elevated nighttime cortisol levels. This keeps the body in a semi-stressed state, preventing full parasympathetic activation. This imbalance between melatonin and cortisol has a direct effect on glucose metabolism. Elevated nighttime cortisol can increase hepatic glucose output, meaning the liver continues releasing glucose into the bloodstream when it is not needed. This contributes to overnight blood sugar instability and can worsen insulin sensitivity over time. At the mitochondrial level, melatonin also serves as a powerful antioxidant. Mitochondria are highly sensitive to oxidative stress, and melatonin helps neutralize free radicals generated during cellular metabolism. When melatonin production is suppressed, mitochondrial oxidative stress increases, leading to reduced ATP production. This translates clinically into lower energy levels, fatigue, and reduced metabolic efficiency. Additionally, impaired melatonin signaling affects the autonomic nervous system. A healthy evening transition requires a shift from sympathetic dominance, alert, active state, to parasympathetic dominance, rest, digestion, repair. Blue light exposure delays this shift, keeping the nervous system in a more activated state. As a result, heart rate variability may remain elevated, digestion slows, and the body struggles to fully enter restorative sleep stages. Another key metabolic consequence is its effect on appetite-regulating hormones. Disrupted sleep and reduced melatonin can alter leptin and ghrelin balance. Leptin, the satiety hormone, tends to decrease, while ghrelin, the hunger hormone, increases. This hormonal shift often leads to increased cravings, especially for high carbohydrate and high sugar foods the following day, further contributing to insulin imbalance and weight gain. Over time, chronic evening light exposure can contribute to a cascade of metabolic dysfunction, reduced growth hormone output, impaired fat oxidation, insulin resistance, mitochondrial inefficiency, and hormonal imbalance in appetite regulation. These changes do not occur overnight, but develop gradually through repeated disruption of circadian signaling. In summary, excessive blue light exposure in the evening is not just a sleep issue, it is a profound hormonal disruptor. By suppressing melatonin, it interferes with the body's ability to repair, burn fat, regulate glucose, and restore metabolic balance during sleep. What if one of the most overlooked reasons for slow metabolism, stubborn fat gain, and constant fatigue has nothing to do with what you eat, but everything to do with how inactive your body remains during the evening hours? One of the most important yet under-discussed principles in human metabolism is that your body is not designed for prolonged stillness, especially during the post-dinner and evening period. Prolonged inactivity in the evening significantly lowers metabolic rate, reduces key enzyme activity involved in fat burning, and alters the hormonal environment that regulates energy balance. To understand this, you need to first recognize that metabolism is not a fixed number. It is a dynamic process influenced by movement, muscle activity, and cellular signaling. One of the central regulators of metabolic flexibility is an enzyme system known as AMPK, or adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase. AMPK acts as a metabolic switch, signaling the body to increase energy production and enhance fat oxidation when energy demand rises. When you remain inactive for long periods in the evening, sitting for hours after dinner, lying down immediately after eating, or engaging in prolonged screen-based sedentary behavior, AMPK activity decreases significantly. This leads to reduced fat oxidation and a shift toward energy conservation rather than energy utilization. At the same time, muscle tissue plays a critical role in metabolic regulation. Skeletal muscle is the largest site of glucose disposal in the body. When muscles are inactive, glucose uptake decreases and insulin sensitivity declines. This means that after evening meals, glucose remains in circulation longer, requiring higher insulin output to manage blood sugar levels. Over time, this pattern contributes to insulin resistance, especially when combined with evening carbohydrate intake. Reduced muscle activity means fewer GLUT4 transporters are activated, which are responsible for moving glucose into muscle cells. As a result, more glucose is diverted toward fat storage pathways in the liver and adipose tissue. Another important factor is the effect of inactivity on mitochondrial function. Mitochondria are responsible for converting nutrients into usable energy in the form of ATP. Physical movement, even light activity such as walking, stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis and improves their efficiency. However, prolonged inactivity signals the opposite, reduced mitochondrial demand. This leads to a gradual decline in energy production capacity, which clinically manifests as fatigue, low stamina, and reduced metabolic rate. Evening inactivity also impacts circulation and lymphatic flow. The lymphatic system relies heavily on muscle contraction to move lymph fluid throughout the body. When movement is reduced for extended periods, lymphatic drainage slows. This can contribute to mild fluid retention, toxin accumulation, and a general feeling of heaviness or sluggishness. While not immediately obvious, this impaired clearance system affects overall metabolic efficiency. Hormonal regulation is also directly influenced by activity levels. Physical movement helps regulate cortisol rhythm, ensuring that stress hormones decline appropriately in the evening. When the body remains sedentary for prolonged periods combined with mental inactivity or screen exposure, cortisol clearance can become inefficient. This may contribute to elevated nighttime cortisol levels, which interfere with sleep quality and fat metabolism. In addition, inactivity reduces the natural stimulation of growth hormone pathways. While growth hormone release is primarily sleep-dependent, it is also influenced by overall metabolic demand and physical activity levels throughout the day and evening. Reduced movement signals a lower energy requirement, which can indirectly blunt the metabolic signals that support optimal hormone secretion during sleep. There is also a thermogenic component to consider. Physical activity increases core body temperature and stimulates post-exercise energy expenditure, even at low intensity. When you remain inactive in the evening, this thermogenic effect is absent, leading to a lower overall calorie burn. Over time, this reduction in daily energy expenditure contributes to a positive energy balance, which promotes fat accumulation. Importantly, even light activity has measurable metabolic benefits. Simple movements such as walking after meals, standing periodically, or engaging in light stretching can significantly improve glucose clearance and insulin sensitivity. These activities activate muscle contractions that enhance nutrient uptake and support metabolic flexibility without requiring intense exercise. From a clinical perspective, prolonged evening inactivity creates a metabolic environment characterized by reduced AMPK activity, decreased insulin sensitivity, impaired mitochondrial function, slowed lymphatic flow, and altered hormonal balance. Together, these changes shift the body toward energy storage rather than energy utilization. In summary, extended periods of inactivity in the evening are not metabolically neutral. They actively contribute to a slower metabolism, reduced fat oxidation, and increased insulin resistance. Movement is not just exercise. It is a fundamental biological signal that regulates how your body processes energy, burns fat, and maintains metabolic health.